Very good afternoon to you, grade 9s. By the time you get to watch this in your sweltering classroom, I'll be up the mountain with the grade 8s. Just a reminder for the test on our next period. I see you next week. If there are any questions, you can post to me or just pop in and see me at a break or after school, and I'll answer them. So the last thing we have to do, and we just started this when we ran out of time, is the Women's March of 1946. Please read those pages over there, which I'll refer to now. Okay, so we've spoken quite a bit about the past laws. So just a couple of references there. So every black or African man had to carry a passbook, and I say African men at that stage. It was given the derogatory term, the dompas. It was obviously extremely unpopular. And the past laws were viciously maintained by the police. They could stop men in the streets. They could wake them up in the middle of the night to check their passbooks. Between 1900 and 1986, when the pass laws were eventually scrapped, 17 million Africans were arrested because of past law offences. So this is a very common sight. There's a white policeman checking on the pass of an African man. Indian and coloured people were also discriminated against, but most importantly, they did not have to carry passes. And part of that was this whole divide and rule. So we already discussed how the government did that with tribalism, as it was called then. So they would put the Xhosa against the Zulu, but they also they put black people against coloured and Indians. And one way that they did that was to give coloured and Indians slightly better rights. So coloured and Indians didn't have to carry pass laws. So up until 1952, only African men had to carry passbooks. In 1952, the women had to carry passbooks. The law was made in 1952, but it took about 4 years to implement. So it was only finally implemented in 1946. And the women in the Congress Alliance, which we spoke about yesterday, they organized a protest, which was very rare at that stage because women were seen in very different terms, and they were meant to be stay at home, look after the kids, etc. And they organized a march to the Union Buildings. That's the seat of government in Pretoria. And on the 9th of August 1956, all know the date, that's of course our Women's Day today. That's why South Africa has two Women's Days. The other one is the International Women's Day, I think sometime in March. 20,000 women, which is a huge crowd, marched to Pretoria. They carried a petition, which is a group of complaints or a list of complaints, and it was signed by literally hundreds of thousands of women across the country. They met the leader of the apartheid government on the time, a guy by the name of Prime Minister Strydom. And he refused to come and meet them. He just said he wasn't wasting his time with women. And this is the song that women sung on the protest. I'm not going to attempt that. Now you have touched the woman, Strydom. You have struck a rock. You have dislodged a boulder. You will be crushed. Because for the first time now, women had to carry pass laws, and they were determined to do something about it. So this is from there. What is quite significant, you will see, although the faces are largely African, there were Indian, what have I done? There were Indian women, and there were coloured women, and there were white women part of the march, and of course black women. We'll talk about these three leaders in a second, but those were the four leaders of the march in the front there. Bokoro is the Zulu word for a grinding stone. It is used by women to grind maize. The Impokoro was a symbol of women's strength during time of hardship. Okay, so the campaign by women against passes was defeated. Nothing happened. And by 1960, nearly 4 million women had registered and had to carry or did carry passbooks. So it's very easy to turn around and say, well, of course, the Women's March of 1956, 9th of August, it was a complete failure. Strydom was not crushed. Apartheid wasn't overthrown. But, and this is important, it showed that all races could band together and mobilize against apartheid law. So it was a big success in what it proved in the anti-apartheid struggle. And women from all race groups participated, despite the difficulty that imposed, because apartheid didn't allow them normally to get together for meetings, etc. Okay, so here are the leaders from left. Sophie Williams was a colored lady. Helen Joseph was a white lady. That's Lillian Ngoyi. She was a black lady. And Rahima Musa was an Indian lady. And as mentioned, the 9th of August is still celebrated as National Women's Day. Okay, this is one of the leaders of the march and her comments. We took those piles of protest, those would be the petitions, and left them outside the door of the minister's office. Remember, Prime Minister Strydom refused to meet with them. They knocked on his door, he refused to answer it, but it made no difference. We had recorded our protest for all time. And still today we celebrate the courageous woman who took part in the march to defy apartheid. So we're just going to finish off by looking at a brief biographies of two of the leaders. We won't do all three. We're going to start with Helen Joseph, this is a picture of over here. It was very funky glasses in the 50s and 60s. I think they've sort of come back a little bit, but very, very funky during that time. She was a South African leader who committed to work for the Freedom Charter and the freedom of everybody. These freedoms we will fight for side by side through our lives until we have won our liberty. So she came to South Africa, I think from Britain, in 1931. She married a South African, Billy Joseph. She was a social worker, so she was exposed to the harsh realities of life under apartheid. And so she actively campaigned to overthrow it. She was one of the founder members of the ANC's white ally, the Congress of Democrats, and she was one of the four main leaders of the Women's March. She was banned in 1957. She wasn't actually imprisoned, but she wasn't allowed to leave her home. She was under house arrest, and anything she said or printed wasn't allowed to be broadcast in public or printed. And she, until her age of 80, she was still banned. I don't know what threat she would have posed at that age, but so be it. She lived long enough to see the release of the political prisoners, but sadly she just missed out on our first free and fair elections, which she fought so hard for. She died in 1992 at the ripe old age of 87. This is Helen Joseph's description of the Women's March. I shall never forget what I saw on the 9th of August 1956. Thousands of women standing in silence for a full 30 minutes, arms raised high in the clenched fist of the Congress salute. 20,000 women of all races from all parts of South Africa were massed together in the huge stone amphitheatre of the Union Buildings in Pretoria, the administrative seat of the Union government, high on a hill. It still sits there today. And then a newspaper comment about Helen Joseph. She didn't resemble a freedom fighter. She was white. She was quite funky in the way she dressed. She was tall, upright. Helen Joseph, her spectacles often hiding a mischievous twinkle, looked more like a headmistress. I'll take that as a headmaster, than a threat to the bully boys of apartheid over the 40 years in South Africa. A really, really important person in the struggle nonetheless. And then Lillian Ngoyi, she was a South African anti-apartheid activist. She was one of the four leaders, but she actually led the other three. Okay, so she led 20,000 women that we've already spoken about. She was also, as the leader, the one who knocked on the Prime Minister's door. And later on, after this, she was actually the first woman elected to the executive committee of the ANC. Pleased to say that the ANC today and most political parties, about 50% of their parliamentarians and their representatives are women. But in those days, it was quite rare. And she was the first woman to be on the decision-making executive. And she also helped to launch the Federation of South African Women as well. What stands out about her, like most black people or all black people, she wasn't really allowed access to good jobs. So she worked as a worker in a clothing factory, but she was a brilliant speaker, which is another word for orator. And her fiery inspiration caused people to support her. She was arrested after the march in 1956. She spent 71 days, that's over 2 months, on her Jack Jones in solitary confinement. We discussed solitary confinement, just to remind you, you're completely on your own. You don't see another human. And she was banned and placed under house arrest in Soweto. This is a description of Lillian Ngoyi. This woman factory worker, who is tough like granite on the outside, is soft and compassionate deep down. Mrs. Ngoyi is a brilliant orator or speaker. She can toss an audience on her little finger and infuse everyone with renewed courage. What lovely words. And this then, at the bottom here, is a statement by Lillian Ngoyi herself. Anything can happen. I am always prepared, like I have been in the past. And if it does happen, I will take it in my stride. I think I have already been schooled in weathering storms. In other words, she suffered a lot of hardship in her life. You can tell my friends all over the world that this girl is still her old self, if not more mature after all the experiences. I'm looking forward to the day when my children will share in the wealth of our lovely South Africa. Lovely words by a great leader. And this is a statement written by a close friend after Lillian Ngoyi's death. For 18 years, this brilliant and beautiful woman spent most of her time in a tiny house, silent, so she was under house arrest and struggling to earn money because she wasn't allowed to leave the house. She did sewing on her own, and with her great energies totally suppressed. So just think of how the suffering she must have suffered for all of our benefits. And then a description of Ngoyi's house arrest. Her great energy was squashed. As a banned person restricted to a tiny house in Soweto, Lillian Ngoyi had to ask permission for the most basic things. To go to town, to shop, for material for a dressmaking business, or even to attend the funeral of a relative who died. She couldn't speak at that funeral or take any sort of leadership role. She died in 1980 at the rather young age of 68. Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the term. We are now done. Please watch the videos that I have loaded onto Classroom. And if there is any time, which is unlikely, you can start studying for your test next Thursday.